Okay, I think it's time to get started now. Thank you everybody for coming to this breakout session and hope you're having a good time at the Rural Symposium today. We have here today with us Simon Ridgway and Bruce Smith. Simon is founder of Gold Group Management and Bruce is president, CEO, and director of Radius Gold. So I'm going to pass it right over to them. Here you go without further ado.
Hello, is that? So I'm the Simon Ridgway part of the duo. So bit of a history of my own personal history. So I was born in England shortly after the war years, and then it was the time of nomads and travelers. So I finished up drifting around the world quite a bit for the next 20 odd years, and ended up in the Yukon Territory in about 1978, 79. I'd always wanted to go to the Yukon as a kid. It was somehow the poems of Robbie Service, or the stories of the men that didn't fit in. So it was always a place I wanted to get to. But once getting there, it's 3 times the size of England with 2 roads in it. So once you arrive in this place that you wanted to see, it's like, how do I see it? So mineral exploration. I got involved in mineral exploration, that's how. So I began initially in the late 70s, kind of, working for exploration companies, line cutting, claim staking. And then along came 1980 when the gold took off and I got the gold bug. So I started prospecting. And I spent probably the good part of the 80s in the Yukon in the summertime prospecting, finding projects, and then vending my projects to public companies when I went through Vancouver in the fall. And then I'd head down to Latin America and spend a lot of time on the beaches down there, head back up in the spring and start over again. And then what I found out was that a lot of the companies that I vended my projects to didn't make any discoveries, and in part because they weren't doing great work, or I didn't think they were. So I decided in 1991 to list my own company, and I was living in Dawson City and working in the Tombstone mountain range, which is north of Dawson City. So I listed my first company, and to make it more difficult for myself, I called it Tombstone Exploration. So, 91 was a tough year to get a company listed, and with a name like that, I made it even tougher. So luckily, there was a very wealthy Alaskan placer miner who said he'd buy 50% of my IPO if I agreed to go to Venezuela as soon as the company was listed. So it was listed in, I think it was October 1991, and in January I moved to Venezuela and spent, since then I've spent the last 30 years exploring mostly in Latin America. And I've had a lot of successes. The Tombstone became quite a success. I left that company after a couple of years and then moved to Central America, where I've, made a number of discoveries like Cerro Blanco in the deposit in Guatemala, the Pavan mine in Nicaragua, the San Martin mine in Honduras, and the San Jose mine in Mexico for Fortuna Silver. And the Gold Group was formed to reduce the overhead of the companies that I and my partners would found. So, for instance, Fortuna Silver was founded in the Gold Group. Jorge Ganosa, that worked for me, wanted grub staking to look for silver mines. I grub staked him, and now Fortuna Silver is $1 billion company on the New York Stock Exchange. So there's been some great companies formed from the Gold Group, and mostly because I've backed, geologists that are driven to discover, and that's. And Bruce is one of those geos. He's just spent all his life in the last, 30 years in exploration. But more importantly than being a geologist, he's driven to make discoveries. So I'm going to hand over to Bruce now, and he will present the first couple of companies in the Gold Group. Then I'll come back and talk about Rackla.
Hi there, I'm Bruce. I'm a geologist. Some people would have heard my talk today, and I promised silver coins to people who turned up. I think I've got a few more for those who missed out. But we in Gold Group, I'm the president CEO of Radius Gold up there, and we'll be drilling the Tropico target that I talked about this morning in September. And I'm a director of Rackla, and we're currently drilling in the Yukon at the moment, and Simon will talk about that later, in the Northwest Territories, right on the Yukon border. So I just wanted to talk about Radius briefly. So Radius has got, Maricela property that we're looking for a partner. We've got Plato Verde, which our partners in Mexico is Fresnillo Silver Mines. Fresnillo is the largest silver producer in the world. So they don't joint venture properties that they think might be small, they only take on things that they think might be massive. So we believe that, or at least they believe that it's going to be, has a chance to be very big, Plato Verde. Amalia is another joint venture we did. All these properties up here, by the way, are grassroots discoveries that we made, Simon and I and our teams. We didn't buy them off anybody, we went out and found them, and we were the first to work on all of them. So Amalia, I'll talk briefly about that. Our partner on that's Pan American Silver. They're the second biggest silver miner in the world. It's a great discovery. And then we've got projects in Guatemala that are compelling, very, very interesting geology, great projects, but Guatemala's a bit high risk politically, so risk and reward, and we'll talk a bit about that. So Plato Verde, briefly, is what I call a hidden mining camp. This was mined probably in the 1800s, forgotten about, and then, we rediscovered it. No company ever worked on it before. In fact, the local Tarahumara Indians, which live down here, we talked to the old people. They say their grandparents don't even remember who mined this thing, right? And I'll show you why it's hidden. That's the ignimbrite cover sequence. So it's capped, it's hidden underneath post-mineral volcanics. Yeah. That's the basaltic host, which is highly unusual for a silver deposit to be hosted in basalts. And basalts are just black. That's what you've got mostly on your roads. It doesn't look like much. That's the mine portal there that my geologist friend Javier is pointing to. And when you look at that, it doesn't look like much at all. And that's the waste dumps. Normally waste dumps in Mexico, they're red, stained, full of oxides. You can see them from kilometers away. You see them from space. This one, you can be standing on top of it. You don't even know what's there. And when you look at that mine portal, when I went inside, I was hugely surprised at the scale. Underground mines, bigger, 5 times bigger than this room. Completely mined out by hand in the 1800s. And we're the first company that ever went in there. So that's why Fresnillo came along. It's unusual geology. It took me a long time to describe, but Fresnillo liked it a lot. They offered to pay, so we accepted the deal from them, and we hope that they're going to be drilling in the next 6 months. So this map here, that one, is the distribution of silver sampling underground. There's virtually nothing at surface very much. All these samples are underground, and the distance from here to here is about 600 meters. So there were 2 main mines that were mined underground, and what we're going to try and see is where they go. I don't have a lot of time to talk about all these different projects, but there's breccia mineralization, there's stockwork mineralization. All this gray stuff here is the banded silver, and then there's disseminated mineralization, silver without the silica and without the calcite. So we've got 3 different styles, big historic mines. Nobody ever drilled it. So that's Plato Verde project. Now the next one I found it about 6 years ago. Well, I didn't personally, but one of our prospectors, a Guatemalan geologist that I worked with for 20 years, discovered this thing. I went and had a look at it. We liked it. We acquired it. We got a partner and we started to drill it. And the whole 10, we hit phenomenal grade. So there's 3 areas that have been drilled to date. This Amalia here, the first bit, the second bit California just up here, and the third bit down the bottom, Cuervo. The reason we drilled it right here, this vein system is 10 kilometers long. We drilled it there first because there was a road, right? We drilled it there second because there's a road, and there's no more roads. The road just came in from one side over here and came through here. So we drilled the bits on the road. We had phenomenal success on the road, and the first one we drilled next with a helicopter was down in here, and now we're building roads and things like that. But if you look at the grades, 44 meters at 12 grams gold and 300 silver at Amalia. California, the same sort of thing, big wide widths, very high grades. El Cuervo, again, we hit wide widths and very high grades. So a quick view of this, there's 66 drill holes into it currently, and 35,000 meters of drilling. Now, this is a long section. I'll just quickly show you each area, and then I'll just explain one. So you can sort of see all that purple and red, and that's gold and silver. And I can't explain them all, but I'll just explain one of them, the El Cuervo. Where it's purple and red is high-grade gold and silver. And for example, out here, this was the last hole drilled about a year and a half ago, hole number 66, 13 meters at 841 silver, 10 grams of gold. Phenomenally good grade, that makes mines, that stuff. And you can see that it's wide open to expansion. Across here, down below, on this side. This side wasn't drilled, that's the land surface because topography is really steep. Pan American was our partner on this. They've been drilling, they've been paying. Pan American does a merger. About a year and a half ago they announced it. It's just been completed. And they merged with Yamana. So two big mining companies merged. They just lost focus on exploration, and this came to a halt. But we're doing our best to get it back now. We currently own 35%, Pan American owns 65%, and they've stopped funding because they're trying to merge two mining companies. But I have a plan to try and get this back after we drill Tropico. So just how much more is there to find at that project? There's the down dip extension. So California, up here at the top of the hill, is 1,000 meters vertically above El Cuervo. This is a huge system. In the Sierra Madre Mountains, the veins can go down 1,000 meters. And we've only drilled at California, a couple of 100 meters down. That's it. So we've got a kilometer to go to keep looking, and we can go below Amalia, and we can go below El Cuervo, and also we haven't drilled, very many of the targets. We drilled the targets where the roads went over. We've got 10, 15 targets untouched. So I think that's going to be a mine one day, a great discovery. Just needs a lot more drilling. And we need to, how do we get money back to our shareholders? How do we handle Pan American is the question. So Volcanic Gold Mines in Guatemala, it's another one of our companies. Volcanic joint ventured properties off Radius. There's great geological projects. I'll just show you one. We were drilling here a couple of years ago. We've hit very high grades again. The bottom holes on here, 6 meters at 11 grams and 340 silver, 4 meters at 54 grams gold and 4 kilos silver. So phenomenal grades, open to expansion. We have decided to halt this until Bluestone. I don't know whether many people understand. Bluestone is Lundin Family Mining, as the main investors. They're trying to build the Cerro Blanco mine, which Simon and his team found 30 years ago, 25 years ago. If they get that in production just down the road, we can truck it to them. So we're just leaving them to do the work for now. The project that I really like in Guatemala, it's interesting, you can see these massive faults out here in the Caribbean Ocean. These are plate boundaries. That plate boundary comes rushing, well, first of all, the great projects of Guatemala. That's why we're there. Pan American Silver has this thing called Escobal. It is the largest, highest grade, undeveloped silver resource in the world, probably. There's a mine built, it's been halted. If these guys, Pan American Silver or the Bluestone, Lundin, if they get their mines in production, our projects will be worth a lot. So they're all hosted in the volcanics. What one of our prospectors found is that's the plate boundary where the two continents come together, and you can actually see the offset of the coastline. That coastline of Guatemala has been offset by 50 kilometers. So these are massive faults. And, we found a new orogenic gold district. Big, flaky, coarse grain gold. Samples that you can pick up have 300 to 600 grams of gold, never been drilled. And the thing that's most interesting for me is it's not just in the veins. it's disseminated within the schists. Stockworks within the schists that grade 100 grams of gold. That's a phenomenal drill target. We're trying to get the permitting. Guatemala is difficult, but it's risk and reward. If you had this in any other country in the world probably, or any country with decent government, it would have been drilled years and years ago. So that's a brief explanation of Radius's targets, and then we'll go on to a company that's Rackla.
Yeah. Before we end on Guatemala, so Volcanic is still well financed. We got about $4 million in the treasury. We're not working right now because, as Bruce mentioned, that the Holly discovery is about 40 kilometers, actually 60 kilometers along a paved road from Cerro Blanco. So until that gets permitted, I decided to put a hold on the drilling. And on the Montagua Norte property, we're pending getting a permit from the government to get that concession granted. I think that'll happen very soon. Could you flick to the next slide, Bruce? So I'll just look at so back in the Yukon again. After 30 years, I went back up there because David, the gentleman sitting over there, we had lunch last year, and he mentioned to me about a discovery a company called Snowline had made. And when I got back to the room, I took a look where Snowline was, and it's in this belt that I worked in way back when I listed Tombstone. This is that white stripe across that screen that goes from Alaska all the way to the Northwest Territories is the Tombstone Gold Belt. And in that belt, there are these intrusive hosted gold deposits that are very simple metallurgy. They're usually quite large, and usually they have a lot of placer gold around them. So when I lived in Dawson, I explored that belt, and that's why the company I listed was called Tombstone. When I saw where Snowline's discovery was, historically it used to be understood that the western side of the belt was gold rich, these intrusive bodies were gold rich, and the eastern side was tungsten rich and gold poor. Snowline's discovery, which is, there's no resource on this yet. I'm not sure how many holes are in it, but I think back of the envelope it's in the 5 to 10 million ounce range already, I think. It's very high grade for these type of deposits. So when I took a look at that discovery, and really nobody, years ago that would have caused a huge staking rush, but when I took a look at it, nobody was moved. Nobody had gone around in the area to take a look at these other intrusive bodies. So I did a little research, and we staked right across the border in the Northwest Territories is where we went, and that's because there's a road cutting right through the belt as it crosses into the Northwest Territories. The same geology, the same intrusives coming into the Selwyn Basin rocks. And then when I did the research, there were 3 projects that were owned by juniors that had been worked on previously, the Serre, the Hit, and the Astro. Newmont in 2017 did a huge BLEG stream sediment survey all the way down the Yukon Northwest Territories border. At the very southern end of that work they did, right where it runs into the Tombstone Gold Belt, they got this very large anomaly. And then when they closed in and did the stream sediment, it showed that those streams that were draining these intrusive bodies, these Tombstone intrusives, were running gold. So they got some very high grades in their stream sediment samples. Newmont was looking for kaolin, sediment-hosted gold deposits. So they didn't do any work in the intrusive. They put a huge soil grid in. This is like 10 kilometers long by about 5. And all the work they did was in the sediments, not in the intrusive rocks, where Snowline's discovery was. So when I saw this data, when me and Bruce saw this data and began to look at the geochemistry, look at that trench, 30 meters of 17 grams and 18 meters of 4 grams in the sediments above the intrusive. When you look at the geochemistry, these intrusive hosted deposits have a particular signature. They have gold, bismuth, telluride. And all of the rocks, all of the soils that are anomalous, and the streams have that same signature. So this is an intrusive hosted target. So we're drilling already. So we staked it last year. I acquired the projects that Newmont had and the Hit and the Serre. This is a 1.3 kilometer by 700 meter soil anomaly that was identified by Newmont. They drilled, they put 5 holes into that anomaly, but when they went through the sediments, as soon as they hit the intrusive, they stopped. And the only gold they got with the gold when the results came in was in that intrusive rock. So they've shown that the gold is in the intrusive. So we are drilling there right now. We're on hole 7. We're not seeing the visible gold that Snowline has in the core, so I can't jump up and down and tell you we've got a discovery, but it certainly looks pretty interesting. We're seeing the sheeted veins in the intrusive. So time will tell. We're not going to have results back until September. So on this project, we're kind of drilling blind. I was up there, before I came here, I was up in the Yukon. I spent about 10 days, and I can still climb around on these mountains, I'm glad to say. So I was up on the Hit and the Sarah, and we got some very interesting looking projects on those two. We got these projects, Newmont probably spent $4 to $5 million on all the work they did there, and we bought it for $35,000. We have to pay $350,000 on a 1.5% NSR if we keep it after the drilling. So great acquisition. And this is a really prospective area. You know, there's not going to be a small discovery here. If we make one, it'll be significant. So that's Rackla. It's got 58 million shares out, trading about 30 cents. We financed for this drill program. We're going to drill about 3,000 meters. It's helicopter drilling, so it's quite expensive. In that, probably, hopefully less than $800 a meter to drill. But we're even though there's a road through the middle of those properties, it's helicopter-supported drilling. So we've got to build platforms and get up there. So I think it's a great exploration play, and I'm very happy to be back in the Yukon again. That's about it. Thank you very much, everyone, for listening in. Any questions?
If anybody didn't get a silver coin, probably hand out a few things.
There we go. Okay, thank you all.